Let your hearts rejoice in the Lord. Let your word proclaim his deeds. Let your voice sing out to the world that our God has come to save.
When preparing for today's message, I came across a description of this gospel passage entitled Jesus' Busy Day. Though that wasn't my original interpretation of the passage, the idea of busyness versus balance made me pause. If we listen to Mark's gospel with that in mind, we will all relate to the sense of Jesus being pulled in many directions at the same time. He is followed by demanding crowds and disciples. As we read, we can look beyond the public busy face, the immediacy and urgency which Mark always shares with us, and notice the private and the personal. And in that, we can discern a sense of balance. So that's what I'm speaking about, busyness and balance. And the reason why these words really stood out for me is that this year I had decided would be the year of balance. Not that I was promising in any way to get it right, but rather that I decided this year I would spend time trying to understand why it's so difficult to balance all the different things that pull us in so many different directions. Work, family, friends, rest, quiet private time, church, sport, and so on and so on and so on. How do we do it? I don't know. But I did watch a whole lot of TED Talks, gather a whole lot of groups together and begin to speak about it. And so I'm hoping that through my reflection today, we'll be able to share some of those ideas and that some of them might be useful or applicable to us. In this story, Jesus leaves the synagogue and goes to the home of Simon and Andrew. And there he finds Simon's mother-in-law is ill in bed. Jesus goes up to her, takes her by the hand, and she rises, is healed, and begins to wait on them. I think that in this context, in the time of COVID, we can no longer take the gift of touch for granted, of what it means to be able to hold somebody's hand and what that might have meant for Jesus and for Simon's mother-in-law. And I know that we might ask ourselves, why couldn't these men just make themselves a sandwich? Why should she get up and start waiting on them? Well, for Mark, it was very important that we understand that the healing came from Jesus, that it was instantaneous, that it was God's power that brought about this transformation. And so he described it through her action. So let's not focus just on the act of service, but on the opportunity to give the gift of hospitality and what that would have meant for Simon's mother-in-law. And we too have seen our loved ones too weak to get up and make a cup of tea, too ill. We've been denied the opportunity to hold them and touch them. And so this year, I think we do read this story with new eyes as a result. The story continues, and I wonder who it was who went out and spread the word of what had happened, because that evening, a whole crowd from the village came to the door of the house. And Mark says that the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. And while the town was gathered at the door, the story tells us that Jesus healed many who had various diseases. Stories of instant healing like this seem almost cruel in the face of illness and death that surrounds us. Jesus' mission was not focused only on the physical, it seems. It is we who shine the spotlight on each physical miracle And we have glamorized healing and turned it and Jesus into a type of magician in this way. Jesus healed many, but not all. There is Jesus the celebrity, but who is this Jesus who hides from the crowds, who seeks out deserted places, who prays in the dark, and even eludes his disciples who have to hunt for him? Jesus' mission of bringing the realm of God to this earth, of restoration of wholeness of individuals and community, is far more mysterious then, goes beyond our focus on physical healing, and it leads us to seek the deeper meaning. So the next morning, Jesus got up very early and withdrew and went to pray. We read that very early, while it was still dark, he left the house and went to a solitary place. And Simon and his companions went to look for him. And when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Have you not heard those words before? You know how I spoke about being pulled in all directions? They're all captured in those words. Everyone is looking for you. Jesus had withdrawn in solitude to pray. And we read of him doing this again and again at critical moments throughout his ministry, where he connected with God and where his strength was restored. This demonstrates to us something so necessary and also so obvious when looking at balance. A balance between busyness and stillness, between crowds and solitude, between action and prayer, between noise and silence, and between all those things which I mentioned at the beginning, which tug at us for our attention. And here's where I want to share what all those TED Talks and group discussions and readings brought to me and taught me about balance. I've just listed a set of contrasts: action, prayer, crowds, solitude, and so on. This versus that. But human balance is not about putting one thing against the other, as if on a set of scales. Nothing that we have read here should be interpreted as this versus that, better or worse. We need both. They don't exist in isolation to each other or in opposition to each other. It is the action in this story that feeds the need for quiet contemplation and solitude. It's the contemplation and prayer that energizes and moves Jesus forward back into action, and a new kind of action. When we speak of balance, I've heard and learnt and read that it is unique to each person. And a better word perhaps is equilibrium, because we can picture a flow of energy, sometimes quite wobbly, where we are making adjustments all the time just to stay upright, and other times very grounded and certain, based on deliberate choices and stillness. In my quest, I learnt about two types of balance. The first is the one that you might see in a handstand, or a ballerina balancing on one leg, or a particular Pilates pose that one holds for an extended period of time in stillness. The balance of stillness. And I learned that for that one, for the still, quiet, physical pose, one needs to have a really strong core. I'm speaking about muscles, your inner muscles. And if not, you will wobble all over the place and fall down. And I believe it's true for the discipline of prayer as well, of withdrawing and contemplating, because I believe it is that strengthens our core. And Jesus knew that. Now, for some, it is easier than others. And we shouldn't compare or beat ourselves up over it if this is not something which we're particularly good at. but I do hope that we will follow Jesus' example and set up a rhythm or a pattern that includes stillness in order to strengthen our spiritual core, because we need that. Now, the second type of balance is not the still one, but one like riding a bicycle. It's usually easier to stay balanced if you are in motion. It's when you stop that you fall down or you need to put your foot down. If you have movement and purpose that drives you, then we can see this in Jesus' ability to meet each person at their point of need. In Jesus' movement and motion, from the synagogue to the house, to the place of prayer, and then out to the wider areas. When we ride a bicycle, we need to look up and out, just as after his time of prayer, Jesus did. He did not return to the village where people were seeking him over there. His prayer had reconnected him to his greater call and therefore motivated him to follow his purpose. And so the gospel passage ends with Jesus replying, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." And then he goes to the wider villages of Galilee. In the same way as riding a bicycle, it is easier for us to find balance when we have purpose and when we understand what our unique calling is, which is not to be all things to all people. As a community, we share a sense of purpose, most definitely in our collective worship and in our collective call to be Jesus to one another. But each of us does that in a different way. We don't all follow in the same way. So I pray that each one would move or flow steadily between looking inward and looking outward, and that in this flow or equilibrium demonstrated by Jesus, we too will discover what it is that we're called to do and how to share that calling in our community in ways that are purposeful and intentional and have depth. Not ways that give the illusion of purpose, like our busyness often does, without the real connection and presence, the type that Jesus displayed whether in the privacy of the home of Simon and Andrew or in the public synagogue. Let this be our quest. Amen.